Welcome. It is Verdict with Senator Ted Cruz, Ben Ferguson with you, and it's so nice to have so many of you listening to us on the radio all over the country right now. And as a reminder, if you're listening to the show and you maybe have never heard it before, we do this show as a podcast 3 days a week as well, and so you can download that podcast for free and listen automatically. If you got an iPhone, just open your search bar, put in podcast, a little purple icon pops up, you click on it, bam, you're into podcasts. And just put in Verdict or Ted Cruz, and right there you'll see this podcast, and you can listen to each and every episode. Senator, we've got a lot to talk about on the show, including a lot of conversation this week about the SAVE Act in Washington, D.C., and it even was involved in the partial government shutdown as well.
Well, we're going to talk about the SAVE Act and what we can do in the Senate to get this passed, to require that only American citizens can register to vote, to require photo ID to vote, and what it's going to take to break down the Democrats and force this vote on the Senate floor. We're also going to talk about a hearing that I chaired this week on the Somali fraud in Minnesota. It is massive. And I'll tell you, at the hearing, the Democrats wanted to talk about absolutely anything else other than this massive fraud. Shocker. We came with the receipts. We're going to walk you through it. And then this past week was really significant in that the American Medical Association reversed its position, and they now oppose sex change surgeries for children. That is a major shift. It is in significant part a result of the $2 million detransitioner lawsuit. We're going to break down what a sea change this is, that the medical associations that were pushing this propaganda have reversed course now.
Yeah, it really is incredible, and it's going to, I honestly think, save a lot of kids' lives, and I mean that sincerely, especially when you deal with the suicide rates that are all connected to all of that issue. We're going to talk about that coming up as well. Let me also tell you about an amazing organization called Compassion International. I want you to just pause what you're doing for the next 60 seconds, and I want you to imagine Lucy, a 7-year-old. Her stomach often aches with hunger. Her small hands, instead of holding crayons, know only the struggle of survival on dusty streets. School is a distant dream. Medical care, a forgotten hope. Lucy's potential is overshadowed. Her future is dim. But what if someone stepped in? What if there was a way to ignite hope for children just like Lucy? Well, there is. And that is with Compassion International Partners and the local churches that provide children holistic support. More than just food. They receive critical medical care, life-changing education, vital skills training, and spiritual development, all in Jesus' name. And you can empower a child just like Lucy to break free from poverty. I want you to do what I've done and sponsor a child today. You can visit compassion.com. That's compassion.com. All right, Senator, so let's talk about the SAVE Act. It was brought up, and it was a part of the discussion, the debate, even with the partial government shutdown. There are a lot of conservatives that I've talked to this past week. They don't understand why this hasn't happened already. It's already come out of the House before. And the big question is, well, why can't we just pass it right now? I think there's a lot of misinformation on this, and it's not a 50+1 vote to get this done. It is 60 votes you need to get this done. And if you want to know who to blame, look at the Democratic Party. They have dug in. Chuck Schumer's made it very clear, and there isn't a single Democrat that had his blessing to vote in favor of this thing. He's calling it Jim Crow 2.0.
Well, the SAVE Act, which was initially introduced in the House of Representatives by Chip Roy, my former chief of staff, the SAVE Act requires proof of American citizenship to register to vote. It's common sense legislation. And then actually President Trump has changed it. And President Trump did two changes. Number one, he wanted to change the name from the SAVE Act to the Save America Act. So now the president is calling it the Save America Act. Number two, he wanted to add to it not just proof of citizenship to register to vote, but also a requirement of photo ID to vote. We've done that. I'm a sponsor of the Save America Act. I think it makes absolute sense. But the challenge is that the Democrats are dug in and are rabidly opposing it. And under the Senate rules, it takes 60 votes to move forward. And right now we can anticipate every Senate Democrat voting no. Now, we're going to break down where public opinion is on this, and then I'm going to tell you the strategy that I'm urging John Thune and Republican leadership to do to get this done in the Senate. But first of all, let's just cover where the polling is. I want you to give a listen to actually something pretty remarkable. I want you to listen to Chuck Schumer actually on Morning Joe, so on MSNBC, being questioned about just how much support there is for the Save America Act.
So, Leader Schumer, this talk about election security has revived discussions of the SAVE Act, which you have said you oppose. Proponents of it say that it's, to have ID, you have to prove U.S. citizenship to be able to vote. Though some of the claims they make, to be clear, are overstated. We know there's not widespread election fraud. But polling does suggest, there's a new Pew Research poll that 95% of Republicans, but also 71% of Democrats like this idea. So why do you not?
It's Jim Crow 2.0. And I called it Jim Crow 2.0, and the right wing went nuts all over the internet. That's because they know it's true. What they're trying to do here is the same thing that was done in the South for decades to prevent people of color from voting. For instance, if you change, you're a woman who got married and changed your last name, you won't be able to show ID and you'll be discriminated against. If you can't find a birth certificate or a proper ID, you'll be discriminated against. This is vicious and nasty. And I said to our Republican colleagues, it will not pass the Senate. You will not get a single Democratic vote in the Senate. We're not reviving Jim Crow all over the country.
Now, Senator, look, I actually believe him. I think it's very clear he's shot multiple shots, big ones across the bow of every Democrat in the Senate. You are not going to give the Republicans this victory. The part, though, there that he talks about being Jim Crow, he's not listening to African Americans in this country, because more than 70% in a poll that was put out by CNN that they were mentioning that same poll there. And I want to play it. This was CNN's own words breaking down the support for voter ID based on race. Take a listen to this.
Take a look here. Favor photo ID to vote. 85% of white people favor it. 82% of Latino. 76% of black Americans favor it. So the bottom line is this. Voter ID is not controversial in this country. A photo ID to vote is not controversial in this country. It is not controversial by party, and it is not controversial by race. The vast majority of Americans agree with Nicki Minaj that, in fact, you should have a photo ID to be able to vote.
So you listen to him, and again, go back to this. 76% of blacks, 82% of Latino, 85% of white, and that's coming from CNN, Senator.
Look, the American people overwhelmingly support photo ID to vote because it's a common sense step. You have to have a photo ID to drive a car. You have to have a photo ID to get on an airplane. You have to have a photo ID to buy a beer at a bar. You have to have a photo ID to go
to the Democratic convention.
Movie. You have to look. They know it is popular. And by the way, I will say, look, Schumer using the rhetoric about Jim Crow, there is an irony in that it was his party, it was the Democrats who enacted the Jim Crow laws. It was his party, the Democrats, who created the KKK. It was his party, the Democrats, that kept the system of segregation in for decades. He uses this rhetoric because the Democrats do not care that Democrats overwhelmingly supported voters. They don't care that African Americans and Hispanics support it. They have a partisan position. They are for voter fraud.
The other question I want to ask you is, why are Democrats so opposed to it if it's not about cheating? Because if whites are at 85, Latinos at 82, and blacks at 76, I'm not sure there's that many subjects in America you could get this type of consensus on, including Republicans and Democrats. Those that identify as Republicans and Democrats also overwhelmingly agree this is a good thing.
Yeah, look, the American people overwhelmingly support photo ID to vote. The Democrats are not opposing this because their base is telling them to oppose it. As we talked about, 71% of Democrats, voters, think photo ID to vote is a good idea. They're opposing it for two reasons. Number one, they're opposing it, I believe, because voter fraud is a real and persistent problem, and they count on voter fraud to help them win elections. And so they don't want photo ID because they want cheating. If you look at the Democrats, when they have control over elections, they put in place policies that expand voter fraud. And by the way, look. If you're not inclined to believe me, you might say, okay, Cruz is being a Republican. Although if you're not inclined to believe me, I am wondering why you're listening to Verdict with Ted Cruz. But set that aside. If you're not inclined to believe me, maybe you would believe Democrat President Jimmy Carter, because Democrat President Jimmy Carter joined with former Republican Secretary of State James Baker. They chaired what was called the Carter-Baker Commission, studying voter fraud. They concluded voter fraud is real, it is a problem, it has changed the outcome of elections, and they recommended a series of steps to prevent voter fraud. They recommended, number one, limiting the use of mail-in ballots, because mail-in ballots make it easier to cheat. They recommended, number two, requiring photo ID to vote, because that makes it harder to cheat. They recommended, number three, prohibiting ballot harvesting, prohibiting paid political operatives being able to collect the ballots of others, because that invites voter fraud. Well, Ben, do you know what the position is now of Chuck Schumer and every congressional Democrat?
It is to oppose any type of voter ID.
It's worse than that. They literally went down the recommendations of the Carter-Baker Commission on how to stop voter fraud, and they reversed them all. So the Carter-Baker Commission said, if you want to stop voter fraud, limit mail-in ballots. The Democrat want mail-in ballots in every election. The Carter-Baker Commission said require photo ID. The Democrats are adamantly opposed to photo ID. And the most pernicious, ballot harvesting, the Carter-Baker Commission said unequivocally ballot harvesting invites, it encourages voter fraud. What is the position of Democrats? They want ballot harvesting. They have made a political decision.
By the way, explain ballot harvesting to people that don't understand that terminology. Yeah. It's been used a lot, but what does it mean?
So let's take a state like California. Ballot harvesting is legal in California. What it means is you could have a paid political operative, someone who works for the Democrats, go to a nursing home. Go to a nursing home and fill out the ballots with the elderly people with them and take their ballots. So, okay, Mr. Jones, who are you going to vote for? Who are you going to vote for? Let's do it together. They take the ballots. And you can have one operative collecting hundreds of ballots. Why does that invite fraud? Well, let's say you're sitting there and Mr. Jones votes for Donald Trump. If you're an unscrupulous operative, you know what you do? You take that ballot and throw it in the trash. Like, nobody checks to see if you send them in.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you have, say, in nursing homes, people with dementia, people that are not there, if you're sitting there filling out their ballot with them, you can just vote for the Democrat. And so it sets up a way for paid operatives to cheat, and it makes it very easy to cheat. The Democrats have made a political decision. They are for election fraud. Secondly, though,
go ahead.
Secondly, though, Chuck Schumer, when he says it's Jim Crow 2.0, I think they view this issue as a way to gin up the extremes in their base and to scare people. Look, Jim Crow 2.0 would be bad. I don't want to see a bunch of racist Democrats putting laws in place that hurt minorities like they did before. And it's all about scary rhetoric. So it's a combination of encouraging fraud and using scary rhetoric. Now, here's the question, Ben. How do we get this done? If the Democrats are adamantly going to oppose it, and I'll tell you what I am urging the other Republican senators, what I'm urging our leadership, is we should nuke what's called the zombie filibuster. What does that mean? So under the Senate rules, it takes 60 votes to end debate. And it used to be, for most of the history of the Senate, to do a filibuster, you had to stand up and talk and talk and talk. You remember back in 2013 against Obamacare, I did a 21-hour filibuster and talked for 21 hours straight. That used to be how you had to do it. Now, we don't make the Democrats talk and talk and talk and fill the airspace. We just let them vote. No, I'm voting to filibuster, and once I say I'm filibustering, we're done. We can force them, one after the other, to stand up, to keep talking, and make the filibuster really painful. Now, there's another side of it, though. The Democrats can keep challenging whether we have a quorum on the Senate floor. What that means is that we've got to be able to produce 50 bodies. We've got to have at least 50 Republican senators who can show up on the Senate floor and demonstrate a quorum. So it is painful for both the majority and the minority. And right now, it's not clear that we have 50 Republicans who support doing this. I am making the case. This week, I made the case vigorously to my Republican colleagues. Mike Lee is making the case vigorously to our Republican colleagues. Rick Scott is making the case vigorously to our Republican colleagues. But it's not clear if we have 50 or not. If we don't have 50, we can't do it. And so I think we ought to make it incredibly painful for Democrats and do everything we can to try to push them to the point of exhaustion. And if they get to that point, then we can pass the Save America Act.
Yeah, by the way, I've been saying this on TV. I think it's really important that Republicans explain that we're in favor of this, but we have to have 10 Democrats to get this thing done. Seven, I should say. 7 Democrats to get this thing done. And without getting those 7 to get us to this, the perfect number of 60.
And understand, happen. We will get 0. We're not going to get 7. 0. We're not going to get 1. Every Democrat will follow Schumer's orders on this.
All right, Senator, you did something that was really underreported this week, and it was important. I say underreported because there was a partial government shutdown. There was the Trump coming out with Trump RX as well. There was a lot going on, but this dealt with Somali fraud, and we need to take some real time to discuss exactly what you helped expose this week of what's going on in Minnesota.
Well, I'm the chairman of the Oversight Subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I convened a hearing and chaired a hearing this week on the massive fraud that we saw in Minnesota with the Somali community and had witnesses, including the whistleblower who joined with the YouTuber in exposing the fraud. And I got to say, as we were going through the evidence of the biggest fraud in recorded history, that was done with the complicity of Democrat office holders, it was amazing. Democrat senators wanted to talk about absolutely any other topic other than the actual facts of what happened. Here, give a listen to what I had to say at the hearing. Federal prosecutors in Minnesota now estimate that half or more of the $18 billion spent since 2018 across 14 Minnesota welfare programs may have been lost to fraud. If confirmed, the amount stolen would rank among the largest welfare frauds in American history. In Minnesota, a welfare system designed to uplift the most vulnerable children was treated like an open ATM, exploiting both taxpayers and the public trust extended to immigrant communities. Over the last decade, Minnesota Democrats didn't just fail to stop the fraud. They made it easy and profitable, and in a totally lawless fashion, silenced anyone who pointed it out. Taken together, the record shows that the fraud was not accidental or unforeseeable, but was the product of deliberate inaction, willful blindness, and calculated abuse.
At this point, I got to ask you this question, Senator. Is there any government program in Minnesota that is not being abused by the Somali community? When they figure out a way to defraud it, they just go all in?
If you look at the numbers, the percentages of the Somali community in Minnesota that are on welfare, they're staggering. Here, give a listen from the hearing. The programs move billions of dollars each year, and they're concentrated within a relatively small number of administrative pipelines. Minnesota's Somali community receives welfare benefits at rates far higher than the state average, making these programs both financially significant and politically sensitive. In a state where the 2 closest statewide elections were decided by less than 1%, the Somali community votes overwhelmingly Democrat. The numbers are stark. 81% of Somali households in Minnesota receive some form of welfare. 81%, compared to 21% of non-Somali households. 54% of Somali households receive food stamps, compared to 7% of non-Somali households. 73% are enrolled in Medicaid, compared to 18% of non-Somali households. And 27% receive cash assistance, compared to 6% of non-Somali households.
Senator, you hear those numbers are staggering, and I also think what's scary is what we're witnessing here is also the type of fraud that's now being uncovered in other states, including California. It's shocking rates. Elon Musk was tweeting about that earlier before we were doing the show, just like he can't even believe, and he was the Doge guy, just how much stealing, and this is just straight stealing from the American people is going on in virtually every government program that they can get their hands on. It's happening.
Look, and it shows the fundamental corruption of Democrats. Number one, they imported vast numbers of illegal immigrants into this country, vast number of Somalis into this country. They put almost all of them on welfare, so they're paying them. They put them on programs that are entirely fraudulent. They're taking that money, sending it back to Somalia. That money, by the way, the Minnesota taxpayers are the number one funder of al-Shabaab, the terrorist Islamist group in Somalia. It has received hundreds of millions of dollars in stolen money from the Minnesota taxpayers. And the Democrats are doing this deliberately. And I got to say, it was amazing at this hearing. The Democrat senators at the hearing did not dispute any of what I'm saying. Instead, they just tried to change the subject. Give a listen to my response to their efforts to change the subject. In that enormous word cloud, virtually nothing about $9 billion stolen from Minnesota taxpayers by Somali fraudsters, with Democrat politicians knowing full well what is happening, facilitating it, and harvesting votes and campaign dollars from the people robbing the children of Minnesota. My Democrat colleagues want you desperately not to focus on those facts. And so instead, miraculously, the Democrats have discovered the Sermon on the Mount. Well, this hearing is going to focus on $9 billion stolen from the taxpayers, and hundreds of millions of those dollars going to the al-Shabaab terrorist organization funded by the Democrats.
You would think there would be some sort of accountability there for on the point that you just made, Senator, and that is about money going to terrorist organizations. When you were talking about that, was there any of the Democrats that were actually paying attention? Were they listening? Or
Nope.
it just because you put up a poster, and I want to play this for people, but it was, and if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you'll actually get to see this. But you have al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda's most lethal affiliate, a poster of them on a truck as terrorists, and you have it up behind you. And I just want to play this very quickly for people so they can hear what you said.
When billions of dollars are stolen from U.S. welfare programs and sent abroad, there is no credible way to ensure those funds do not enrich jihadists within al-Shabaab. As one confidential source told the Manhattan Institute, the largest funder of al-Shabaab, a Islamist terrorist organization in Somalia, is the Minnesota taxpayer. Listen to that again. The single largest funder of al-Shabaab, a terrorist organization in Somalia, is the taxpayers of Minnesota.
I mean, how are people not going to jail for this? And are people going to go to jail? Because at this point, there are so many conservatives say, I want someone arrested. If we have our money going to terrorists, are someone going to go to jail for this? Not like a one fall guy. How is this not just like the paddy wagons backing up and people are going to jail?
We need to prosecute every Democrat politician who was complicit in this. By the way, what I laid out about the money going to al-Shabaab, not a single Democrat senator disputed it. They didn't say a word about it. I want you to listen to the back and forth I had with the Democrat witness, the head of Public Citizen, this left-wing group who really didn't want to see anyone prosecuted for this fraud. Give a listen. Mr. Weissman, you're co-president of Public Citizen, which describes itself as a consumer advocate and a pro-democracy organization. Would you agree that the fraud in Minnesota was staggering and shocking?
I agree that there is fraud in Minnesota. I don't believe these estimates are grounded in any evidence that I've seen. The $9 billion figure was based on a claim just that, well, I think that half of them must be fraudulent. I just heard a comment just saying, boost the number up. But to be clear, and with respect, you missed my testimony. No question there's fraud in Minnesota, and absolutely I share your righteous anger about whatever degree of fraud there was there.
Do you agree that any Democrat politician, or let me be clear, any Republican politician that had knowledge of the fraud and was complicit should be prosecuted?
I'm not sure what they're being prosecuted for, but also in my testimony, I described also outside of Minnesota the manifold ways that this administration is enabling fraud.
I understand.
Oh,
The reason, hold on.
The standard is that you want
Sir,
to prosecute.
I'm going to ask a question, and then you can answer it.
Yes, sir.
Your organization describes itself as a pro-democracy organization. I'm going to
Correct.
try to find out if you actually are pro-democracy or if you're simply pro-Democrat and are a partisan. We've seen the Democrats who want to change the topic. So I get you want to testify how much you hate Donald Trump. But I'm quite certain Donald Trump was not running a fraudulent daycare center or a fraudulent autism center in Minnesota. So all of the talking points about how you dislike Trump, set them aside. We will see the Democrats on this committee go down those talking points. Do you believe elected politicians in Minnesota who were aware of this fraud and were complicit in it should be prosecuted? Should there be accountability?
There absolutely should be accountability. It is not normal to prosecute government officials for not prosecuting fraud. That is not a standard I'm aware of that you've advocated or that anyone else has advocated in the Senate.
So do you think it's perfectly okay?
I did not say
if let's say Governor Walz or Attorney General Ellison knew about the fraud, benefited from the fraud in terms of bundling votes, benefited from the frauds in terms of collecting campaign finance violations, and deliberately looked the other way? You think that you think that's not criminal conduct?
In that hypothetical, it is not okay. 100% not okay. But also, if you'll permit me, that hypothetical is in fact happening throughout.
Okay, yes, I get it. You dislike Trump. I understand you dislike Trump,
sir. It is whether I have a standard of accountability.
So let me, sir, please do not interrupt me. Please do not.
I'm being clear.
Please do not interrupt me. Please do not interrupt me.
Sir.
You may answer questions after I ask. You've heard the evidence and testimony about daycare centers with no children, with no toys, with no facilities, with windows that are blacked out. Do you believe it is possible that the officials sending millions of dollars to those fake daycare centers and fake autism centers didn't know what was going on?
Well, what I heard was claims about that, and I too have watched the video. We're both parents. I'm glad that the child care centers don't open their door for someone who's knocking there. I don't view that as evidence that the child care centers are fake child care centers, although I'm sure there are some. My understanding is that state investigators have gone to do their duty at those exact same child centers and have found that most of them actually are operating correctly.
Well, I will say it is disappointing that you had a chance leading a nonprofit that is supposedly pro-democracy to take a principled stand. Instead, you decided to defend the Somali fraudsters because it benefits elected.
Senator, it really is amazing that Democrats will defend this type of corruption and fraud, and they'll do it right to your face.
Yeah, look, they affirmatively support it. They benefit from it. They get elected. Look, one of the things I said in the hearing, the two closest statewide elections in Minnesota were 1-point races. So this is the difference between Democrats winning and losing. And I got to say, by the way, I invited to this hearing Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. I invited Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. I invited Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. All three of them refused to come. They could have come and defended themselves. They could have come and said that they were not complicit in this, but they effectively went into witness protection. Yeah. And Ben, I don't know if you saw what our friend John Kennedy said this past week about Tim Walz.
What did he say?
He said Tim Walz is a less masculine version of Hillary Clinton.
We should put that on the back of the Leering Center shirts, right? Like the Leering Center on the front, that quote on the back. I love it. Truly incredible. All right, lastly, before we run out of time, Senator, I do want to talk about a big victory this week for protecting kids. And we're seeing new guidance that's coming out saying that you shouldn't be mutilating children with transition surgeries until they're adults. That's a no-brainer. But now we're seeing a big change, and this is going to save the lives of many children.
Yeah, so this week, the American Society of Plastic Surgeons announced that it no longer supported, quote, gender-affirming surgeries for children under 18. This is a big reversal. And then the next day, the American Medical Association said it agrees with the American Society of Plastic Surgeons about the surgery. And so the AMA said also you should not do these surgeries for minors. And the AMA said in a statement that because, quote, the evidence for gender-affirming surgical intervention in minors is insufficient for us to make a definitive statement, the AMA agrees with ASPS that surgical interventions in minors should generally be deferred to adulthood. That is a big, big deal. Just a couple of years ago, the AMA and all these medical groups were pushing, do the surgeries, sterilize the kids. And one of the real triggers was the $2 million malpractice lawsuit that was won by detransitioner Fox Varian, and that prompted.
Interesting. That happens, and bam! Now every one of these woke groups and the doctor groups that were all making millions off this, they're like, "Hold on a second, let's change it. We don't want to lose all of our money."
Yeah, and by the way, to give you a sense of just what a massive shift this is, in 2021, here's what the AMA said on its website: "Quote." The American Medical Association today strengthened its established position opposing the governmental intrusion into the practice of medicine that is detrimental to the health of transgender and gender-diverse children and adults. Legislatures in 20 states this year proposed banning physicians and other healthcare professionals from providing medically necessary gender-affirming care to transgender and gender-diverse youth. In response to this legislative trend, physicians and medical students at the AMA's House of Delegates meeting voted to meaningfully expand the organization's strong opposition to undue restrictions on medical care to populations that have been politicized in state legislatures. That was 5 years ago, and you want to talk about a massive sea change. That's a big, big deal.
Yeah, Senator, it really is.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, J.K. Rowling, who's really been courageous on this topic, she put out a long tweet this week on this topic that's worth reflecting on. She said a young detransitioner, Fox Varian, has won $2 million damages in a medical malpractice lawsuit in which she sued the psychologist and surgeon who approved her for a double mastectomy, age 16. Remember they told us that wasn't happening? Well, it happened to her.
Yeah.
Varian's mother testified that she'd been against the surgery, but was pressured into agreeing because she'd been told that unless her daughter transitioned, she was likely to commit suicide. As the floodgates open and more detransitioners sue the clinicians who subjected them to an unregulated medical experiment, gender identity activists will almost certainly continue to ignore any evidence that fails to support their preferred narrative. And she goes on to say, this will go down in history as one of the worst medical scandals of all time. Adults inside and outside the medical profession sold troubled young people like Varian the idea that all of their complex trauma would be resolved by removing healthy body parts. You know what? Woke is receding, and that's a huge victory. It's a huge victory for kids, and it's a huge victory for sanity.
Amen to that. Don't forget, we do the show as a podcast as well, so make sure you download it wherever you get your podcasts. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, hit that subscribe or auto-download button. You can also watch us on YouTube as well. And if you've been listening on the radio, thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here on this radio station next week and all week on the podcast. It's been a pleasure to be with you. You've been listening to Verdict with Ted Cruz. See you next week.